Welcome everyone to the next session of this terrific conference. I think we had an absolutely superb opening session, and I think this session is hopefully going to be the equal to that. This is a day in the life. The session is aimed at helping patient organisations gain insights and perspectives about the challenges that those making decisions face, the importance of collaboration and presenting a united front in the context of health advocacy and communication, and what we should reasonably expect from our politicians and government. I'm Rowan Greenland, I'm the CEO at MS Australia. I'm someone who's living with an autoimmune condition, and I've got to say this session is full of people who are some of my favourite people. We're going to hear shortly from Dr. Andrew Leigh, who is my local Member of Parliament, and also from the former Health Minister, Nicola Roxon. She really is a stellar rock star when it comes to being a health minister. She is someone who goes beyond just being a politician to someone who really deeply cared about the subject matter that she dealt with. Then we're going to be joined by a fabulous set of panellists, Felicity McNeil, Paul Cross and Louise Hardy. I'm looking forward to a really exciting panel session to really tease out some of those critical issues. I'm absolutely delighted to be facilitating this session. I gave an oration 2 or 3 years ago about this particular topic, and it really goes to how decision makers, what influences decision makers, how do you influence them? They have incredibly busy lives, particularly health ministers, we think of ourselves and our issues that we take to them, and they're dealing with about 1 million issues a day. And we send them submissions and we think they're just sitting there waiting for our submission to land on their desk to read carefully. It is a very challenging environment. I've worked for a couple of health ministers the pieces of paper, the messages, the emails come flooding in at the rate of knots. And so getting your voice heard is actually really difficult. It's difficult for a whole range of reasons, many of which I'm going to tease out today. So I'm really pleased to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Andrew Leigh. Andrew is the Shadow Assistant Minister for Treasury and Charities. He's also the federal member for Fenner. Also, prior to being elected in 2010, he was a professor of economics at the Australian National University. He really has been a champion of the charity sector, and he's spoken out about the need for supporting health charities, particularly members of the National Patient Organisation Network. He's been a strong advocate for accountability and transparency within the JobKeeper program. He holds a PhD in public policy from Harvard, having graduated from the University of Sydney with first-class honours in arts and law. So he's incredibly well-rounded. I've got to say that he also comes with another attribute which I incredibly admire as a complete amateur runner. He's a very accomplished distance runner and has completed many marathons. And I think being in politics, if you can stay the distance, you certainly will reach your goals. So without further ado, can I introduce to you Andrew Leigh.
Well, thanks so much, Rowan, and thank you to the National Patient Organisation Network for inviting me to speak with you today. I'm coming to you from the lands of the Ngunnawal people, so let me begin by acknowledging their ownership. Dara Nuna, Dara Ngunnawal, Yungu, Nalamanyan, Dunimanyan, Ngunnawal Wari, Dara Wari, Dindi, Wangarlin Jinyin, and acknowledge any Indigenous people who are part of today's conversation. You couldn't hope for a better MC than Rowan, somebody who has been on both sides of the lobbying process, understands the way in which health ministers operate, but is also someone with a generosity of spirit, a big heart, and who understands the importance of advocating for patients. I was just thinking about some of the contacts I've had with some of your member organisations, and the earliest one goes back to being part of the MS Readathon while I was a kid. I remember we lived in Waterfall, a small suburb in the south of Sydney, and I door knocked around with the MS Readathon booklet, raising money to try and find a cure to this incredibly awful disease. And then just in January this year, we've had the study published in Science suggesting a very strong link between the Epstein-Barr virus and multiple sclerosis. So it really is decades in the making, but the breakthroughs have come faster as a result of the funding that the MS Foundation and others have been able to obtain. The Donate Life Walk is a major feature on the Canberra calendar. It sees a whole lot of schools and community members come together for a big walk around the lake in Canberra each year to raise the profile of the issue of organ donation. Pain Australia has been very important in putting onto the radar of politicians something which was not previously discussed to the same extent, the challenge of people living with chronic pain and how that's to be managed. A very big challenge in the context of the opioid epidemic in the United States. How we manage to put in place good pain management strategies that reduce people's pain burden over the long term. My colleague Katrina Billick is actively involved in raising money and awareness for brain cancer. And of course, the Mito Foundation was successful in bringing forward to the Parliament laws to change to enable mitochondrial donation. I held a community forum as part of that, a deliberative democracy exercise done in collaboration with the University of Canberra and Ohio State University. I was really impressed by the resources that the Mito Foundation had made available and by the thoughtful ethical conversation that it prompted. And it was great to be able to then speak in Parliament in favour of those law reforms, making the case that I'd been out engaged with my community and they were supportive of changing the law to allow mitochondrial donation. Now, I've been asked how best to go about making the case for change. And one of the leading resources on this, I'm not embarrassed to say, was produced in my office. It's called A Toolkit for Gender Advocacy. This is, my background's being blurred, so I'll just hold it in front of my face so the camera doesn't unblur it. And it's produced by Joanna Richards, who worked on secondment in my office in putting this together. Joanna's initial aim was to provide a toolkit for people advocating on gender-based issues. She talks about the case study of RU486 conscience vote in 2006, and also about some of the lobbying that's taken place since around gender-based issues. But actually, Joanna's toolkit is just as good for anyone lobbying parliamentarians. She makes a number of important points in that resource, which I see Kate Holliday has very helpfully just put up on the chat there. Joanna talks about the importance of having the right number of people in the meeting. You don't want to have 20 people for a 15-minute meeting. You want to have as many people as can create a sense of energy, share some stories, but then also respect the time of the person that you're meeting with and the fact that you won't be able to get across everything. Joanna talks about the importance of having a leave-away document, or just a one-pager, which makes clear what you're asking for. There might be a law change, or it might be something as straightforward as asking the parliamentarian to tell a story of a local constituent who's affected by the condition that you're lobbying about. In that light, she also reminds us of the importance of ethical storytelling. I think of a lot of change in politics as being driven by a combination of statistics and storytelling. I used to be an economics professor, and economics basically runs off the power of statistics. But stories matter enormously. Humans are storytelling creatures. And so if you can combine those two, then that can be really powerful. But as you're telling the story of somebody who's affected by a particular condition, telling the story of a particular patient, you want to make sure that you have you've ensured that story can be retold in a public forum, whether it's a local newspaper column or indeed in Parliament itself. The last thing we wanted to be doing as parliamentarians is to be breaching the confidentiality. And it's also important too to see meetings as being not the final point, but being part of an ongoing strategy. So if you look at the change that was brought about with the marriage equality vote, that began with initial conversations within the gay and lesbian community in order to coalesce around the issue of marriage equality. Then began with conversations with supportive parliamentarians and less supportive parliamentarians, until eventually popular opinion had shifted markedly and the law changed. That theory of change comes about through a sense of respect in those initial conversations, a recognition that not everything will change in one conversation, but that you can leave a positive impression about the importance of an issue. Most parliamentarians are keen to tell the stories of their local communities and keen to talk about how government can make people's lives better. So recognising the inherent goodness in most people who work in politics can be pretty worthwhile as a starting point. I disagree with my Conservative opponents over a range of different issues, but I don't for a moment think that they're insensitive to people's pain and suffering. I don't for a moment think that they don't care deeply about the well-being of their electors. That's true of all of the 151 people who serve in the reps and the 76 people who serve in the Senate. And that means that it's possible to build a broad consensus that crosses party lines. Now, Rowan mentioned before the challenge of lobbying around health ministers. And obviously, when you're engaging directly with the minister, then you will often be working with the public servants who are responsible for making the change or approving the treatments that you're interested in. In that case, you might be a little more inclined to focus on the research evidence. How sure can we be that these treatments are effective? How long are they effective for? How much do they cost? And how do they compare to other things that are being done in the area? I think being open to working with the government's priorities is vital, whether that's a priority around active exercise or preventive health, or in ensuring that we manage to contain the problems that are caused by long-term challenges. Being sensitive to those larger issues is vital, and bringing as much evidence to bear as you can. But patient organisations really are among the most powerful advocates that I've seen. I've learned a lot from your stories. I've appreciated engaging with you as a federal member of Parliament over the course of 10.5 years in Parliament. Those stories are in some sense a real privilege of being a member of Parliament. My father's father was a Methodist church minister in Victoria. I remember my dad talking about how for his dad, a lot of the work was the real privilege of hearing those powerful stories. I feel like it's a real privilege to hear those stories from patient organisations. We can't always make a difference, but we're always here to listen, to amplify your stories, and hopefully to provide the research and the treatment support that you're arguing for. I know that long speeches on Zoom can sometimes be a little wearing, so let me wrap it up there, Rowan, and very happy to take questions that people have. And if you need a hard copy of the Toolkit for Gender Advocacy, we're very happy to mail you one of those as well. I'm easy to find online, the modestly named andrewleigh.com. Just drop me an email, we'll put one in the post to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Andrew. That's a fantastic address. There was a lot in that. The questions are now coming thick and fast. I have one from Andrew Giles. Andrew says a lot of organisations are, of course, putting together election policy documents for public and political consumption. And of course, if you haven't done your lobbying by now, people say it's far too late, but often that's the articulation of many years of advocacy into political parties. Andrew asks, when you put out election manifestos or policy statements, what's best? Should they be short or long? Should you go out and ask candidates to sign up to pledges? What works best in this, and there are millions of them every time an election comes around? What works best for health groups wanting to get their voice heard during an election campaign?
Yeah, I think that's a real challenge. And as you say, Rowan, election campaigns are fast moving and can be difficult to get an issue up, particularly if you're talking about rare cancers, for example, affecting only a relatively small proportion of the population. We have seen health issues become a sort of first order issue in the campaign. I think about the mental health election of, I think it was 2013, where that, or maybe either 2010 or 2013, where mental health became a really big issue. But apart from that, specific health issues are rarely top of mind. One of the things that organisations may want to bear in mind is the size of the coalition. So if it is possible to build a coalition of change across multiple groups, that's going to be more compelling for both sides of politics. Short is always better than long. Trying to call for wholesale restructuring of how we do the PBS is probably going to be more difficult to get up than calling for support for particular treatments on the PBS. And again, providing links to sites where more information can be available is probably better than producing a 100-page manifesto.
Thank you. I've got another question here. What are your from Sean Murray? What are your recommendations for organisations that have multiple issues they're advocating for? Should they just really focus on the top one or two, or should they try for a package of measures?
If you can build a coalition for a package of measures, that's worthwhile. If you're a single organisation and the direct number of people that are affected is relatively small, which I think is true for the most national patient organisations, then I suppose narrowing the agenda makes more sense.
Excellent. And also, I've got someone here who's asking a very perceptive question. They're saying that their experience that political parties, as they go to election, tend to have a team that pulls together policy options. So if it's the Labor Party, there'll obviously be a number of very big picture policy pieces that have been years in the making coming from the shadow ministers. But also they have a bucket of other measures that could be announced during the course of an election, depending on the circumstances. Is that right? Do you have in the Labor Party a flexible pot? And if you get in the pot, you've got a chance of being announced during an election. And the barrel is dipped into as you go along?
Yeah, it is not policy making as lucky dip, Rowan. There's and that's, you see that partly from the focus on costings, which has become more salient with the rise of the Parliamentary Budget Office. So it's expected that in the last week of the campaign, both parties will put out a costings document that sets out all of their policies and how they'll be costed. And there's a process steadily moving up to that. So certainly not every policy is absolutely locked down, but there's a large degree of consensus across which policies are going to be announced by both political parties. The key decision maker, obviously, on our side is Mark Butler, the Shadow Health Minister. On the coalition side, and Emma McBride as his Assistant Minister. On the coalition side, you've got Greg Hunt now retiring, and some uncertainty over who would serve as Health Minister if the coalition were to be re-elected. So there, a strategy of targeting more broadly might be optimal for patient organisations.
Thank you. I've got another question here. This one actually relates, and you spoke beautifully about the importance of storytelling. This is a very specific one about what happens with cultures where storytelling is taboo. How do you get your message across in those circumstances? And in fact, you know, having worked at Palliative Care Australia, we always thought that talking about death and dying was actually one of the last taboo areas, and it was culturally taboo for many groups and culturally diverse groups. So difficult, but also politicians don't like talking about death and dying either, and we found some difficulty there. So what about storytelling when those sort of taboo issues involved?
Yeah, those taboos that I think are largely fading away, Rowan. I mean, you and I are both runners, and whenever I run past Clare Holland House on the shores of Lake Burley Griffin, I think about Liz Dawson, a great Canberra social justice activist. She's the reason why we have a common ground building housing the homeless here in Gungahlin, because she persistently lobbied business people and politicians to make a difference. But I think of Liz too, because that's where I last saw her, telling stories, surrounded by friends in Clare Holland House, and being provided really good quality palliative care. So I'm not aware, I haven't come across many settings in which storytelling is taboo. And indeed, the advocacy of Grace Tame, for example, speaks to her power to speak out on an issue which was considered taboo until very recently.
Thank you. And in fact, there's a lot of great compliments coming through on the chat line here. I'll just read one of them. It says, "What a wonderful chap Dr. Leigh is." But there's a few of those. But one last question, I think, coming in really relates to, I guess, how policy is done in Australia. And we have a lot of short-termism. You know, in my observations of the health department and health policy making over the years, a lot of health policy making is incredibly short-term and focused on really immediate issues of the day. How do we get good long-term health planning in the system? Big picture stuff that addresses, you know, those issues that are not going away anytime soon. You know, we see, for example, in alcohol policy, and this covers both economics and health issues. Why is it that we haven't seen any decent reform of alcohol taxation for decades, despite 24 odd reports recommending that we changed policy on taxation for, amongst other things, sound health reasons? It would be a wonderful source of income to help support the health budget and prevention budget, and many of the things that our patient groups are lobbying for. And why is it that we actually see the opposite happening, you know, actually decreases in alcohol taxation?
Yeah, I think the question of alcohol taxation is probably one we'd need to leave to a longer conversation, and around questions such as whether the elasticities differ across different drinks. But I do believe it's possible to make a case for long-term investment. So we saw this through the National Disability Insurance Scheme, and strong emphasis on the importance of ensuring that we had early intervention strategies as well as treatment. The treatment was important, but if you got high quality early intervention with kids, you could really make a difference. The prominence of FASD has risen over recent years. Again, one of those issues where specific programs targeting alcohol misuse during pregnancy can be extraordinarily powerful and have big long-run payoffs. I think preventive health has been underdone in recent years. I've been disappointed that the Medical Research Future Fund really hasn't given a reasonable amount to preventive health programs. That's something that I would hope that we could make a difference on if we were to win government, because there's many issues where early intervention, particularly evidence-based early intervention, can make a huge difference. If that's my last question, Rowan, let me also just thank everyone for your energy and your activism. You make a big difference for your patients, but one of the things that may not always be top of mind is you make a big difference for the nation. Politics is about people engaging with their representatives. This is not some kind of an elite sport in which we're all sitting out in the stands watching people playing on the field. In politics, we're all on the field. By being on the field, you're strengthening the democracy. So thank you for what you do there.
And thank you for joining us today, Andrew. The compliments are flooding in, I can tell you. So thank you very much, and thank you for your time.
Pleasure. Thank you, Rowan. Thanks, everyone.